I bought the house in late October, right before things started getting cold in northern Ohio. It wasn't a rushed decision, but it wasn't slow either. I had been renting for years, and when my lease ended, I told myself I was done throwing money away. This place came up at the right time, just under my budget, in a quiet neighborhood that felt stable. The previous owner was an older man named Richard Halpern. I met him once during the final walkthrough. He didn't seem unfriendly, just off in a way I couldn't really define at the time. He followed me from room to room, not saying much, just watching. At one point, I remember he ran his hand along the kitchen counter like he was memorizing it. Before I left that day, he said something that stuck with me longer than it should have. He said, "Take care of her. She doesn't like being empty." I thought it was just one of those things older people say about houses they've lived in for decades. I didn't think anything of it after that. The first week in the house felt normal. I was busy unpacking, setting up utilities, figuring out where everything should go. The place had that quiet, slightly hollow feeling that most houses have when you first move in. Every sound felt louder than it should have, but I expected that. The first piece of mail came on the third day. It was addressed to Richard Halpern. That didn't surprise me. People forget to update their address all the time. I set it aside near the door, thinking I'd either return it to sender or maybe drop it off at the forwarding address if I ever got one. Over the next few days, more mail came, all for him. Bills, envelopes that looked handwritten, even a small package. It started to pile up. After about a week, I decided to call my realtor and ask if she had a forwarding address for Richard. She told me he had moved into assisted living about an hour away. She said she'd send me the address so I could forward anything important. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't, because 2 days after that call, I came home from work and noticed something that didn't make sense. The stack of mail I had left on the small table by the door had been moved. Not knocked over, not shifted slightly, moved. I'm not a messy person, and I'm not forgetful about things like that. I had stacked everything neatly in one place. When I walked in, the pile was spread out, like someone had gone through it. I stood there for a while, just staring at it, trying to convince myself I had done it and didn't remember. That was easier than thinking anything else. I checked the doors and windows. Everything was locked. Nothing looked forced. Nothing looked out of place besides the mail. I told myself it was nothing. The next thing happened a few nights later. I had just gotten into bed, lights off, phone charging on the nightstand. I remember checking the time. It was around 11:40. I wasn't fully asleep yet when I heard something downstairs. It sounded like a drawer opening, not loud. Just a quiet, deliberate slide. I froze, listening. At first, I thought it might be the house settling. Old houses make noises. I knew that. But then I heard it again. Another drawer. Slow. Controlled. Not random. I sat up and listened for maybe a full minute. Nothing after that. Just silence. I didn't go downstairs. I told myself I was overreacting. Eventually, I lay back down and fell asleep. The next morning, I checked the kitchen before leaving for work. One of the drawers was slightly open. I stood there longer than I want to admit, just looking at it. I knew I hadn't left it like that. I'm careful about things like that. Still, I pushed it closed, grabbed my keys, and left. That day at work, I couldn't focus. I kept replaying the sound in my head, the way it moved. The fact that it didn't sound random. That evening, I decided to do something simple. Before going to bed, I took a photo of the kitchen. Nothing detailed. Just enough to show the drawers, the cabinets, the general layout. I don't know why I did it. I just wanted proof of how things looked before I went to sleep. That night, I heard it again. This time, it wasn't just one sound. It was movement. Slow footsteps. Not heavy, not light, just steady, walking across the floor downstairs. I didn't move. I didn't get up. I stayed in bed, completely still, listening. The footsteps lasted maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. No doors opening, no closing, just stopped. I don't think I slept at all after that. In the morning, I went straight to the kitchen and compared what I saw to the photo I had taken. At first glance, everything looked the same. Then I noticed one thing. The mail. It had been rearranged again. Not just moved. Sorted. The envelopes were now in a neat line, ordered by size. I didn't do that. And I knew I hadn't done that. That was the first time I felt something close to real fear. Not panic, not shock. Just a slow realization that something wasn't right in a way I couldn't explain. That afternoon, I called the realtor again. I asked her directly if anyone else had keys to the house. She said no. After closing, the locks had been rekeyed. Standard procedure. I asked about Richard. She told me he had been moved out completely before I took ownership. Family handled it. The house had been empty for a couple of weeks before I moved in. Then she said something I didn't expect. She said, "Why? Is something wrong?" I almost told her. Instead, I said no. That night, I didn't stay in the house. I told myself I needed a clear head. So I booked a cheap motel about 15 minutes away. Before leaving, I did one more thing. I took all the mail addressed to Richard and left it on the kitchen table. Then I placed my phone on a shelf facing the room and recorded video. I didn't know what I expected to catch. Probably nothing. The next morning, I came back. The house looked exactly the same from the outside. Nothing unusual. Inside, everything felt still. Too still. I went straight to the kitchen. The mail was gone. All of it. The table was completely empty. I checked the trash. Nothing. Checked the cabinets. Nothing. It was just gone. I stood there for a long time, trying to process what I was seeing. Then I remembered the phone. I went to the shelf and picked it up. The recording was still running. Over 8 hours of footage. I skipped through most of it. Nothing happened for hours. Then, around 2:17 a.m., something changed. The kitchen light turned on. Not flickering. Not gradual. Just on. A few seconds later, someone walked into frame. It was a man. Older. Thin. Wearing the same clothes I had seen during the final walkthrough. Richard. He moved slowly, like he wasn't in a hurry. He walked up to the table, looked down at the mail, and started going through it, one by one, reading, opening some, setting others aside. He stayed there for maybe 10 minutes. At one point, he paused and looked directly toward the camera, not at it, through it, like he knew it was there. Then he gathered all the mail, held it against his chest, turned off the light, and walked out of frame. The rest of the video was empty. I didn't call the police. I didn't try to go back at night. I didn't confront anything. I packed what I could that same day and left. I stayed with a friend for a week while I figured out what to do next. Eventually, I put the house back on the market. I didn't mention what happened. I didn't think anyone would believe me. And even if they did, it wouldn't help. It sold about 2 months later. Before closing, I went back one last time to make sure everything was cleared out. The house felt empty again. Normal. As I was leaving, I checked the mailbox one last time out of habit. There was a single envelope inside. No stamp. No return address. Just my name. I opened it in my car. Inside was a folded piece of paper. It said, in neat handwriting, "Thank you for keeping things in order." I don't live alone anymore, and I don't keep mail sitting out. Ever. When my partner and I finally found a house that felt right, it wasn't because it was perfect or brand new. It was because it had character and a sense of quiet we hadn't found anywhere else in the city. The kind of place where you could imagine settling down without feeling boxed in by someone else's choices. And for the first few weeks after we moved in, It felt exactly like that. The unpacking and organizing consumed us, and the neighborhood was calm, friendly, and predictable, so we didn't think much about what might have been hidden in the walls or forgotten behind doors that hadn't been opened in decades. And it wasn't until the fourth week that we noticed the oddity. A barely perceptible draft coming from the corner of our bedroom closet that made the clothes hangers sway slightly even though all the windows were shut and the heating had been running steadily. I was the first to reach out and examine it, moving the jackets aside and brushing my hand along the back panel, which was just a thin, painted wooden sheet that had somehow been nailed in place and painted over so thoroughly it blended perfectly with the wall, the kind of detail a homeowner might take pride in. But as I pressed against it, I felt it give slightly under my palm, and my heart raced, not from fear, but from curiosity. The rational part of my brain argued it might just be an old access panel for plumbing or electrical work, and yet the other part, the part one couldn't quite control, urged me to investigate further. After a few minutes of hesitation, I found a screwdriver in the drawer and carefully pried the panel loose, the nail screeching faintly against the wood, revealing a narrow opening that smelled faintly of dust and mold. And when I shined my phone's flashlight inside, I realized it wasn't just an empty cavity, but a small, narrow room that went back at least 10 or 12 feet, barely tall enough for me to stand upright, and lined with old, chipped wooden shelves, and in the dim light I could see a few pieces of what looked like old furniture pushed against the far wall, covered in dust and decades of neglect, like a snapshot frozen in time from another era. Hidden behind this closet wall, as if whoever built it didn't want anyone to find it. I shouldn't have opened it alone, but I couldn't resist, and that night, after dinner, I returned with my partner, and we crouched at the entrance, flashlights sweeping the interior slowly, noting the remnants of old wallpaper, a small mattress stained and yellowed from age, a cracked porcelain pitcher, and several cardboard boxes stacked haphazardly against one wall, each covered in dust that suggested they hadn't been touched in decades. And it struck us both that someone had clearly lived here, or at least spent considerable time, without leaving any trace outside of this room. We debated what to do next, but neither of us could stop thinking about it. So over the next week, we carefully removed the boxes and examined their contents, discovering journals, photographs, letters, and a few small personal items, each one chronicling someone's life as if they had vanished suddenly, leaving only these private scraps behind. And the more we read, the more we realized this wasn't an ordinary hidden storage space. The journals mentioned feeling watched, hearing people move through the house when no one else was there, and even references to someone in the closet. Words that made us pause repeatedly, thinking we were misinterpreting or projecting. But each entry seemed to echo the same quiet terror, as if the person who had built or discovered this space had been trying to remain invisible while documenting their fear. As we dug further, the unease grew, not in a supernatural sense, but in a way that made the hairs on my neck stand up and my stomach knot, because we started noticing things in the main house that mirrored the journals, like doors left slightly ajar when we were certain we had closed them, small scratches on the floors that didn't match our movements, and objects subtly shifted from where we had left them. And though part of me tried to rationalize it as fatigue, forgetfulness, or a draft, another part, the part that had a visceral understanding of human behavior, told me someone had been inside the house, possibly even watching us from that hidden room, or perhaps waiting for us to leave it undisturbed for years. One evening, we were both home, unpacking boxes in the living room, when my partner called my name from the bedroom, asking me to look at something. And when I arrived, she was pointing at the closet door, pale and trembling, because the panel we had pried open was slightly ajar, even though we had firmly replaced it, and there was no way it could have moved on its own. And it was then that we realized this hidden room was not just a relic of the past, but something active, something that had perhaps been designed to conceal whoever had been here and possibly whoever remained hidden, because nothing else explained the subtle but undeniable signs that someone had been inside after us, after the house had supposedly been empty for decades. The realization forced us to call in a professional locksmith and contractor, someone who could confirm whether the wall had been tampered with structurally, and they discovered small, expertly hidden seams in the woodwork, tiny vent-like gaps for airflow, and a barely detectable ladder leading further back into the bowels of the house, suggesting the hidden room was part of a larger, interconnected system, though they could not access it fully without extensive renovation. And their skepticism about someone actually living there did nothing to ease our tension, because the evidence, the rearranged boxes, the footprints in the dust, the unmistakable feeling of being watched, was overwhelmingly real to us. Eventually, we decided to move out, not immediately, but over the course of a few weeks, quietly packing what we could, documenting everything, and leaving the house for the last time with the sense that we had barely escaped intrusion, or at least the potential for it. And though the hidden room remained undiscovered by the new owners, the experience stayed with us permanently, influencing the way we approached homes, strangers, and even the simple act of opening closets, because we had seen, up close, how a quiet, everyday space could hide something entirely unexpected, and once you know it, you can never unknow it. Even now, years later, I sometimes imagine the room behind that closet, still filled with dust, journals, and unspoken stories, and the knowledge that some hidden spaces are not meant to be explored, because human curiosity has a way of drawing you towards secrets that may never be meant to be uncovered, and the aftermath of that discovery is not just fear, but a permanent awareness that the walls we live within can conceal entire lives we will never fully understand. When I first bought the house, I didn't expect it to feel lived in already, but in a strange way it did. The place was old, a colonial-style home built in the 1940s, with creaking floors and drafty windows that gave it a kind of charm I had always wanted, the kind that felt authentic and full of character rather than sterile and generic. And I was so caught up in the excitement of moving in that I didn't think much about the little noises I heard in the first few days, the subtle groans of the floors, the soft whistle of wind through the corners of the roof, or the muffled thump that sounded like furniture settling. But by the end of the first week, I started to notice a pattern that I couldn't explain rationally. It started with the attic. I rarely went up there. It was dusty, filled with boxes left behind by the previous owners, some containing old holiday decorations, others old clothes, photo albums, and a few pieces of furniture that had long outlived their usefulness, and I was careful to keep the latter folded back when not in use. The first night I really noticed something. I was downstairs watching TV around 10:30 p.m., and I thought I heard a soft footstep above me. Just one, deliberate, heavy enough to be a human step, but too slow and precise to be random. I froze, thinking maybe it was the heating system, the way the pipes groaned in older homes. But as I strained my ears, I heard it again. Another footstep, then another, walking across the attic floor in a rhythm that didn't match my own movements and couldn't be explained by the house settling. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining it, and I tried to go to bed as usual. But that night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone walking slowly above me, just out of sight, and the next morning, I decided to inspect the attic properly, bringing a flashlight and carefully climbing up the ladder, expecting to find nothing but dust and boxes, maybe a raccoon or a squirrel that had somehow gotten in. But when I arrived, everything looked normal. exactly as it had been during my first inspection. Boxes stacked neatly, nothing disturbed, no footprints, no displaced items, no sign that anyone had been there in weeks. I told myself I was overreacting, but over the next few days, the footsteps continued, every night, same time, same slow, deliberate rhythm, never during the day, never when anyone else was home, and always stopping abruptly as if the person walking was aware I could hear them, as if they were testing me or simply marking their presence without ever revealing themselves. I tried to record it with my phone, setting it up in the hallway that ran directly under the attic, but when I played the recordings back, there was only silence, nothing that matched the clarity and precision of what I had heard, and it was beginning to feel like the house itself was mocking me, like some quiet awareness was moving just above me, aware I was there and watching but unwilling to confront me directly. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and one night, I stayed up until 2 a.m., flashlight in hand, standing at the bottom of the attic ladder, determined to catch whoever, or whatever, was walking up there. The steps began exactly as usual, soft and slow, but as I climbed the ladder, heart pounding, I realized something impossible. The footsteps didn't change as I ascended. They didn't speed up, they didn't stop, they continued along the same path, always in front of me, though the attic was empty, with nothing to step on but bare wood and stacks of boxes. My first thought was that it was a trick of acoustics, that the sound traveled through the old beams in ways I couldn't understand, but no matter how I moved, it sounded like someone was pacing deliberately ahead of me, leading me somewhere, and the weight of it made me pause on the ladder, realizing I was standing in a house where someone's presence could be felt but never seen, and the tension was enough to make me shake uncontrollably. The next morning, I told a friend about it, someone I trusted to be rational, and we agreed to check the attic together. We climbed up slowly, stepping carefully over the uneven boards and moving boxes aside. But again, we found nothing. No hidden compartments, no secret doors, no evidence of anyone having been in the attic. And yet the feeling of being followed remained, heavier in the daylight, almost mocking. It wasn't long before we discovered an even stranger anomaly. The attic connected, through a small, sealed passage in the far corner, to the neighboring house, a connection that had likely been walled off decades ago, which explained the occasional slight draft and the almost imperceptible noise that had traveled across that wall. The idea that someone could have used it without being seen, while unsettling, still didn't account for the rhythmic footsteps that always seemed to lead or anticipate my movements. The weeks that followed were exhausting, mentally and physically. I stopped sleeping well, constantly checking the attic and listening for those steps, never able to convince myself they were only in my head. And even when I was away from the house, I couldn't shake the feeling of presence, the sensation that something from that attic had extended beyond the walls themselves, or at least that my mind had been permanently attuned to it. I eventually contacted a structural engineer and a locksmith to investigate the attic and the hidden connection, but they found nothing actionable beyond the old sealed passage, and the previous owners couldn't provide any insight. They had lived there for over 30 years and had never noticed anyone else, or so they said. In the end, I moved out, quietly selling the house to a family that was unaware of the hidden connection, and I still think about it, even now, years later, because the attic footsteps never fully left me. The thing that stayed with me wasn't the fear or the unknown, but the understanding that human perception can be fragile and incomplete, that a space can be shared in ways invisible to the eyes, and that some places carry the imprint of unseen presence so strongly that no amount of rational explanation will erase it. I still dream about the slow, measured rhythm of those steps, always just ahead of me, always in a house I once called home, and the aftermath of that experience taught me that the real horror of living somewhere isn't always what you see, but what you feel lingering in the corners, behind walls, and in the attic above you, shaping the way you move, breathe, and live long after you leave.